What happens when a lighthearted morning interview turns into one of the most uncomfortable moments in live television history? When a music icon finds herself blindsided by questions she never agreed to answer. And when a host refuses to back down despite every signal to change course? This is the story of how Gwen Stefani walked off the Today Show. And trust me, you need to hear how this unfolded, because what started as a simple album promotion turned into something nobody saw coming. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me if you think the host crossed the line. After you hear the whole story, you'll have some strong opinions. The studio lights were bright as always, and the energy in the room felt standard for a Tuesday morning segment. Gwen Stefani sat across from the host, Sarah Mitchell, with the kind of polished confidence you'd expect from someone who has done thousands of interviews over decades in the industry. The conversation started pleasantly enough, with Sarah asking about the new album, the creative process, and what fans could expect from the upcoming tour. Gwen was animated, smiling, sharing anecdotes about late-night recording sessions and the collaboration with producers who helped shape the sound. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, Sarah shifted in her seat, and you could almost feel the temperature in the room change. She leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious, more probing. What she said next would set off a chain reaction nobody in that studio was prepared for. So Gwen, I want to talk about something that's been circulating online for the past few weeks, Sarah began, her tone suddenly less casual and more investigative. There have been some pretty pointed comments from your former bandmates, specifically about creative control and who really drove the direction of No Doubt during those peak years. Some people are saying that you've rewritten history a bit in recent interviews. What's your response to that? You could see Gwen's smile falter just for a second. Her publicist, sitting off camera, immediately tensed up. This wasn't on the list of approved topics. The pre-interview agreement had been clear. This was about the new album and the tour. Maybe some light personal questions about her family and creative inspiration. But band drama from decades ago was explicitly off limits. Well, Sarah, Gwen responded, her voice still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. I think anyone who was actually there knows what the dynamic was. I've always been incredibly grateful for my time with the band and everything we created together. We were all young. We were all figuring things out, and we made something special. I don't think there's any history that needs rewriting. Sarah nodded, but she didn't move on. Instead, she doubled down. But that's interesting, because in a podcast that came out last month, Tony made some very specific claims about songwriting credits and decision-making processes. He suggested that there were songs where your contributions were, in his words, more about the performance than the actual creation, and he's not the only one who's been talking. Do you feel like maybe there's been some misunderstanding about your role, or are they just not remembering things the same way you are? The smile was completely gone now. Gwen's jaw tightened, and she took a visible breath before responding. Her media training was kicking in, but you could tell she was genuinely caught off guard by the aggression of this line of questioning. I think, Gwen said carefully, that everyone's entitled to their own memories and their own perspectives. But I was there for every single song, every single decision, every late night and early morning. I poured my heart into that music. And anyone who questions that wasn't in the room with us, I don't really think this is the time or place to relitigate decades-old band dynamics. Especially when I'm here to talk about new music that I'm really excited about. It was a clear boundary, a clear attempt to redirect. Any experienced interviewer would have picked up on that signal and pivoted to safer ground. But Sarah didn't pivot. She pressed harder. I hear you saying that, but I think a lot of people watching right now are curious about this because it speaks to something bigger, right? It's about authenticity. It's about giving credit where credit is due. And when you have multiple people from the same band saying similar things, it makes people wonder. So, I guess what I'm asking is, you think you've been completely honest about your contributions? Or is there maybe some ego involved in how you remember those years? The word ego hung in the air like a bomb. Gwen's publicist actually stood up off camera, making a cutting motion with her hand, signaling to the producers that this needed to stop. But they were live, and Sarah was the one holding the microphone. Gwen's response was measured, but the frustration was becoming impossible to hide. Sarah: I've been nothing but honest about my life and my career. I've talked openly about collaboration, about growth, about mistakes I've made. But what you're doing right now feels less like journalism, and more like you're trying to create conflict where there doesn't need to be any. I came here in good faith to talk about my new work, and you're ambushing me with talking points from people who apparently gave interviews I haven't even heard. I'm just asking questions that I think the audience wants answers to, Sarah replied, her tone defensive now. This is live television. These are real conversations. And I think people appreciate when we dig a little deeper instead of just doing puff pieces. You're a public figure. You've put yourself out there. And part of that means being willing to address things that might be uncomfortable. There's a difference between uncomfortable and disrespectful, Gwen shot back, her voice rising slightly. There's a difference between asking tough questions and blindsiding someone with attacks on their character and their integrity. You didn't mention any of this before we started. Your producers told my team this was going to be about the album. If you wanted to do some kind of gotcha interview, you should have been upfront about it. The tension was palpable now. Crew members exchanged glances, unsure whether they should intervene or let it play out. Sarah, to her credit, or perhaps her detriment, didn't back down. I don't think asking about public statements from your former collaborators is a gotcha, Sarah said. These aren't secrets. These are things that have been said in interviews available for anyone to listen to. And I think viewers deserve to hear your side of it. Isn't that fair? Gwen shook off her microphone slightly, adjusting it as if she was considering whether to remove it entirely. She looked directly at Sarah, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but intense. What's fair is honoring the agreements that were made before someone sits down in your chair, Gwen said. What's fair is treating your guests with basic respect. What's fair is understanding that just because something is public doesn't mean it's appropriate to weaponize it in an interview that was supposed to be about celebrating new art. You want to talk about fairness? Let's talk about the fact that you're using my former friend's words to try to humiliate me on national television. Sarah's expression hardened. I'm not trying to humiliate anyone. I'm trying to have an honest conversation. Then have an honest conversation, Gwen replied, her voice steady but firm. Don't dress up an ambush as honesty. You know exactly what you're doing here. You booked me under certain pretenses. You got me in this chair, and now you're trying to create a viral moment at my expense. That's not journalism, Sarah. That's something else entirely. Sarah shifted tactics, her voice taking on a tone of false concern. I think you're being a bit defensive here. And I wonder if that's because there's some truth to what's being said. Because if there wasn't any truth to it, wouldn't it be easier to just address it directly and move on? The fact that you're getting so emotional about this kind of proves that there's something deeper going on. The word emotional was another trigger. Gwen's eyes narrowed. Anyone watching could see that she was done playing nice, done trying to redirect, done giving Sarah the benefit of the doubt. Emotional. Gwen repeated, and there was ice in her voice now. So now we're doing that thing where a woman stands up for herself and suddenly she's being emotional. I'm not emotional, Sarah. I'm clear. I'm clear that you misrepresented what this interview was going to be. I'm clear that you're more interested in drama than dialogue. And I'm clear that you're not actually interested in my answers. You're interested in creating sound bites that make me look bad. That's not true, Sarah protested. but her body language suggested otherwise. She glanced at her notes, clearly looking for her next angle of attack. "I think you're mischaracterizing what I'm trying to do here," Sarah said. "Let me ask you this, and I really do want to understand your perspective. When you went solo, there were a lot of people who felt like you left the band behind in a way that was hurtful. Do you think you could have handled that transition differently? Do you have any regrets about how that all went down?" Gwen let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Are you serious right now? You're asking me if I regret having a solo career? If I regret pursuing my own artistic vision? What kind of question is that?" "I'm asking if you regret the way you did it," Sarah clarified. But the distinction felt meaningless at this point. You want to talk about patterns? Let's talk about the pattern of women in this industry being held to impossible standards. Let's talk about the pattern of female artists being questioned and doubted in ways that male artists never are. Let's talk about the pattern of interviews like this one, where a woman comes on to promote her work and instead gets interrogated about her personal relationships and whether she's nice enough, humble enough, or collaborative enough. Sarah's expression tightened. "Now you're making this about gender when it's really about accountability. It's about both." Gwen shot back immediately. "And if you can't see how gender plays into the way you're talking to me right now, then you're either naive or you're being willfully ignorant. Do you think you'd be asking these questions this way if I were a man? Do you think you'd be using words like emotional, defensive, and ego if I were a male artist sitting in this chair?" "I would ask anyone these questions," Sarah insisted, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "This isn't about you being a woman. This is about you being a public figure who people have legitimate questions about." "Legitimate? According to who?" Gwen demanded. "According to you. According to producers who saw an opportunity to boost ratings by turning what should have been a promotional interview into some kind of trial. I've been in this business for 30 years, Sarah. I've done thousands of interviews. I know the difference between tough questions and hostile interrogation. This is hostile." The crew was definitely uncomfortable now. You could see people looking at each other, silently communicating about whether someone should step in. The segment producer was on her phone, likely getting direction from higher-ups about how to handle this rapidly deteriorating situation. But Sarah pressed on. "I really don't think you're being fair to me right now," Sarah said, and there was a hint of wounded indignation in her tone. "I'm doing my job. I'm asking questions that people want answers to. If you're not willing to engage with that, then maybe you're not ready to be doing interviews at all." That might have been the final straw. Gwen's expression shifted from frustrated to something closer to disbelief. "You're questioning whether I'm ready to do interviews? I've been doing this since before you were probably even in journalism school. I've handled hard questions. I've been challenged. I've been pushed. And I've always shown up with grace and professionalism. But what you're doing isn't journalism. It's entertainment at someone else's expense. And I'm not going to participate in it anymore. So you're just going to shut down instead of having a real conversation," Sarah said. Now, there was definitely an edge of desperation in her voice. She could feel this slipping away, could sense that she'd pushed too far. But she seemed unable to stop herself from trying to regain control of the narrative. "I'm not shutting down," Gwen replied, her voice remarkably calm now, almost eerily so. "I'm setting a boundary. I'm saying no. I'm saying that I don't have to sit here and be disrespected just because you have a microphone and a platform. You want a real conversation. Real conversations require mutual respect. They require good faith. They require both people actually listening to each other instead of just waiting for their turn to attack. And we don't have any of that here." Sarah tried one more time. "Gwen, I think if you just take a breath and really think about what I'm asking, you'll see that I'm coming from a place of wanting to understand your perspective. These questions aren't attacks. There are opportunities for you to set the record straight. Isn't that what you want? Gwen stood up. The movement was deliberate, not rushed or dramatic, but unmistakably final. She reached up and removed her microphone with steady hands, the small clip making a soft sound as it detached from her collar. She placed it carefully on the chair she'd just vacated. When she looked at Sarah, her expression was one of complete resolve. "What I want," Gwen said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent studio, "is to be treated with basic human decency. And since that's apparently too much to ask for here, I'm done." Sarah's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, panic, defensive anger flickering across her features in the span of a few seconds. "Gwen, wait. We're live. You can't just walk off. We still have 4 minutes left in the segment. Watch me," Gwen replied simply. There was something almost liberating in her tone. Like she'd suddenly realized she held all the power in this situation and always had. You can fill those 4 minutes however you want. Maybe you can spend them reflecting on how this interview went so wrong. Maybe you can explain to your viewers why ambushing guests is somehow acceptable. That's up to you. "This is incredibly unprofessional," Sarah said, and her voice was rising now, the carefully maintained broadcast composure starting to crack. "You agreed to be here. You made a commitment to this show, and you're just going to walk away because you didn't like the questions. That's not how this works." Gwen paused, turning back to face Sarah fully. If she'd been angry before, she seemed to have moved beyond that now, into something colder and more controlled. "You want to talk about unprofessional? Let's talk about lying to someone's team about what an interview will cover. Let's talk about blindsiding a guest with hostile questions they never agreed to answer. Let's talk about using someone's private relationships and personal history as weapons for ratings. You broke the professional agreement the moment you decided to turn this into an attack. So don't stand there and lecture me about professionalism when you threw it out the window the second I sat down." "I did not lie," Sarah protested. But even she didn't sound entirely convinced of her own words anymore. The topics we discussed were all within the scope of a standard interview. You're a celebrity. Your life and career are subject to public scrutiny. That's part of the job. "No," Gwen said firmly, taking a step closer to Sarah. Not threateningly, but with the kind of intensity that comes from someone who has finally had enough. "Being a celebrity means people are interested in my work and my public life. It doesn't mean I forfeit my right to be treated with respect. It doesn't mean I have to answer every invasive question someone dreams up. It doesn't mean I have to sit quietly while someone tries to tear me down for entertainment. You seem to have confused access with entitlement, and that's your problem, not mine." The studio had gone completely quiet except for their voices. Everyone was frozen, watching this unfold with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or car crashes. The cameras were still rolling, still broadcasting this entire meltdown to millions of viewers across the country. Sarah made one final attempt to salvage the situation, her voice taking on a pleading quality. "Gwen, please, let's just take a reset here. We can start fresh. We can talk about the album like you want. I'm willing to move past this if you are." "That's generous of you," Gwen said, and the sarcasm was evident. "But I'm not interested in moving past this. I'm interested in moving on from this. There's a difference. Moving past it would mean pretending this didn't happen. Pretending you didn't show me exactly who you are and what you're willing to do for a story. Moving on means I walk out of here. I don't come back, and I make sure everyone knows why. You're going to trash this show." Sarah asked, and now there was genuine fear in her voice. She was clearly starting to realize the potential consequences of how this had played out. "I'm going to tell the truth," Gwen corrected. "I'm going to tell people exactly what happened here. I'm going to talk about how I was misled, how I was ambushed, how I was treated. If that makes the show look bad, well, maybe the show should have thought about that before deciding to treat a guest this way. You made your choices, Sarah. Now you get to live with them. Sarah's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger, or both. It was hard to tell. You know what? Fine. Walk off. Run away from hard questions. Show everyone that you can't handle a little pressure. That really helps your case about not being defensive or having an ego problem. Gwen smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who'd just been proven exactly right about everything they'd suspected. And there it is, the real you, she said. Not the concerned journalist. Not the person who just wants honest conversation. The person who lashes out when they don't get their way. The person who insults and demeans when they lose control. Thank you for making this so clear. Get out then, Sarah snapped. All pretense of professionalism abandoned now. Go ahead and leave. See if anyone cares. See if this doesn't follow you around for the rest of your career. You think you're taking some kind of stand here? You're just showing everyone that you're difficult and entitled and can't handle criticism. Gwen didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. The contrast between her composure and Sarah's unraveling said everything that needed to be said. She simply turned and walked toward the edge of the set. Her head held high, her steps measured and deliberate. We're going to commercial, someone yelled from off camera, probably the director. Finally making the call that should have been made 5 minutes earlier. But before the feed cut, before they could transition to a break, Gwen stopped one more time and looked directly into the camera.